A journalist spent 4 months trying to prove I was a fraud, and she was 3 days from publishing the story that would have destroyed my company when my daughter answered the door and invited her in for dinner. Before I tell you what that reporter found on the other side of my front door and how the woman sent to expose me ended up marrying me, do me one favor. If you believe that the whole truth is sometimes the only thing that can save you, then hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is built on a secret and it holds all the way to the end. Stay with me. My name is Elijah Price. I'm 38 years old. I clean up well, and 4 years ago I was the most talked about tech founder in the city. The guy on the magazine cover's the one everyone wanted a piece of. I'd built an app. I'm not going to bore you with the technology, but the short version is that it helped people who were caring for sick or dying family members, coordinated the medications and the appointments and the insurance nightmares, connected them to other caregivers, took a little of the crushing weight off the people who carry the sickest among us. It was called Tether because that's what it was supposed to be, the line that keeps you connected to someone you're afraid of losing. It grew fast, it grew huge, and I became almost overnight rich and famous and admired the young black founder who'd cracked a problem the whole industry had ignored. And I gave the interviews and I smiled for the cameras, and I told the story. Everyone wanted to hear the story of the brilliant entrepreneur who spotted a market opportunity. That story was a lie, not the app. The app was real. The app was good. The app helped millions of people. All of that was true. The lie was the story I told about why I built it. Because I never told anyone the real reason, and the real reason is the whole reason this story exists. I built Tether while I was watching my wife die. Her name was Simone. We married young, before any of the money, when I was a nobody coder doing contract work, and she was a nurse, and we had a daughter, Amara, and we were happy in the ordinary way that you don't appreciate until it's threatened. And when Amara was 4, Simone was diagnosed with a brain tumor, the bad kind, the kind with a timeline. And I spent the next 2 years being her caregiver, and I learned the way you only learn from the inside, how brutal and lonely and disorganized and crushing it is to care for someone you love while they die. I drowned in the medications and the appointments and the insurance denials and the 3 a.m. panic and the total isolation of it, the way the world keeps spinning while yours ends. And because I was a coder, and because I could not save my wife and I needed somewhere to put my hands, started building a tool. For us, just for us at first. A thing to hold all of it, to keep me tethered to her, to take even 1 ounce of weight off so I could spend that ounce of energy actually being with her instead of managing her. I want you to understand what those 2 years were actually like, because the magazine covers never showed it, and I never told them. There was a night, maybe 8 months in, when Simone had a seizure at 2 in the morning, and I was trying to hold her and call the on-call line and find the right medication and comfort, a 4-year-old who'd woken up scared all at the same time with 2 hands. And I remember standing in the hallway of my own house, sobbing, not because my wife was dying, though she was, but because I was so completely overwhelmed by the logistics of her dying, the sheer administrative brutality of it, the 11 doctors who didn't talk to each other, the pharmacy that closed, the insurance company that denied the scan, the calendar that had become a minefield. And I remember thinking through the tears with the cold part of my brain that never fully shuts off in a coder. This is a systems failure. This is a broken system, and I know how to fix broken systems, and if I fix this one, maybe I can spend the time it gives me back actually holding my wife instead of managing her death. That was the thought. That was the whole company born in a hallway at 2 in the morning out of nothing but love and exhaustion. So I started building. And Simone watched me build it from her bed in the good hours, and she'd suggest things because she'd been a nurse and she knew the system from the other side too. And for a while, that shared project became the best thing we had left, the two of us building a tool to fight the machine that was grinding us down. It gave her something to do besides be sick. It gave me something to do besides be helpless. And near the end, when the good hours were getting rare, she took my hand off the keyboard one night and held it and said, "You have to give this to other people. Promise me. Everybody going through this is as lost as you are right now in that hallway. I heard you, you know, that night. Give it to them so nobody has to stand in a hallway like that alone." It was one of the last fully clear things she ever asked me. Simone died when Amara was 6, and I kept my promise. I took the tool I'd built to keep myself tethered to my dying wife, and I turned it into a company, and it worked, and it helped people, and it made me rich. And here's the part I'm ashamed of. I never told anyone the real story. When the press came, I told them about market opportunities and user pain points and total addressable markets. I gave them the cold founder story, the genius story, because the real story. The story of a broken man building a tool at his wife's deathbed felt too private, too raw, too much. Like handing strangers the worst thing that ever happened to me so they could put it in a headline. So I locked it away. I let the world believe I was a brilliant opportunist. And the lie protected me because as long as the world thought Tether was about business, nobody could touch the part of it that was about Simone. But a lie, even a protective one, even a lie of omission, leaves a hole. And a good journalist can always smell a hole. Her name was Lauren Mitchell, and she was an investigative reporter for a serious outlet, the kind that brings down companies, and she decided that my story didn't add up. And she was right, it didn't, because the story I'd told was false. She couldn't figure out why a coder with no healthcare background and no prior interest in caregiving had suddenly out of nowhere built the definitive caregiving app in 18 months. It didn't track. Founders don't come from nowhere. There's always an origin, and mine was hidden, and to a good investigative reporter, a hidden origin looks exactly like a fraud. She thought I'd stolen the idea, or the code, or that there was some buried scandal, some exploited co-founders. I'd cut out some lie at the root of the company. She spent 4 months digging. She interviewed former employees. She filed records requests. She pieced together timelines. And the more she dug, the more the hole gaped because she was digging around the edges of a grave and didn't know it. And the shape of the emptiness told her something was buried there, and she was determined to find out what. I knew she was digging. My PR people were frantic. They wanted me to get ahead of it, to spin, to threaten legal action, to do all the things powerful men do when a reporter gets close. And I couldn't tell them the truth either, so I just stonewalled, refused her interview requests, went silent, which of course only made me look guiltier, which only made her dig harder. She got closer than anyone ever had. She found a former engineer who told her that the earliest version of Tether's code had comments in it that made no sense for a commercial product. Personal notes, medication names, appointment times, as if the first user had been a single real patient. To Lauren, that looked like proof I'd stolen the app from some real caregiver, some patient I'd exploited, and she chased that theory for weeks trying to find the mysterious patient zero whose life was buried in my source code. She was right that there was a real patient in the earliest code. She just never guessed the patient was my wife and that the exploited caregiver she was hunting for was me. She was standing on top of the answer the whole time, digging, and the thing she kept hitting with her shovel was Simone's grave, and she thought it was a vault. We were locked in a slow-motion collision, the reporter certain she was about to expose a fraud, and the founder certain that the only thing standing between him and the whole world, reading about his wife's death, was silence. And the cruelest irony, which I only understood much later, was that we were the same, Lauren and I. We were both people organized entirely around a single wound. She'd built her whole life around exposing liars because her father was one, and I'd built my whole silence around hiding a truth because the world had taken everything else from me. Two people made of scar tissue hurtling toward each other, each convinced the other was the threat when in fact we were the only two people alive capable of understanding each other exactly. Which brings me to the night she came to the house. She'd found my home address, which good reporters can always do. And she came, I think, to doorstep me to catch me off guard to get a reaction. A quote, anything. It was a school night. And I wasn't home yet. I was stuck at the office, and the person who answered the door was my daughter Amara, who was 10 by then, and Mrs. Okonkwo, our housekeeper, who was in the kitchen. And Amara, who is her mother's daughter, warm and unguarded in a way I'd lost the ability to be open the door to a strange woman with a notebook. And when Lauren asked a little off balance if her father was home, Amara said, "No, but he'll be back soon. Do you want to wait? We're having dinner. There's plenty." And she invited the journalist who was 3 days from destroying our lives to sit down at our table. I want to tell you what Lauren Mitchell saw in the 45 minutes before I got home, because she told me later it was the most important 45 minutes of her career and her life. She saw my house, which is not the house of a cold opportunist. She saw the photographs of Simone everywhere because I could never bring myself to take them down. She saw my daughter, who talked about her dad with a fierce pride, who told this stranger, unprompted, "My mom died when I was little, and my dad built his whole company because of her. Did you know that? He doesn't tell people, but he tells me. It's really about my mom." She saw on the wall of my home office, which Amara showed her, because Amara shows everyone everything, the original hand-drawn sketches of the app, the very first ones with dates on them. Dates that were during Simone's illness, and in the corner of one of them in my handwriting, the words that were the seed of the whole company. So I can be with her instead of managing her. Lauren Mitchell, investigative journalist, sat at my dinner table across from my 10-year-old daughter and realized that the fraud she'd spent 4 months chasing was not a fraud at all. It was a widower who had built a monument to his dead wife and been too private, too wounded to tell anyone. The hole in the story wasn't a crime. It was a grave, and she was sitting in the home of the man she'd nearly destroyed, being offered seconds by his child. I got home to find a strange woman at my table and my daughter chattering happily, and I knew instantly who she was, and I felt the specific cold horror of a man whose most protected secret has just been discovered by the one person on earth most capable of publishing it. I asked Amara to go upstairs, and Lauren and I sat in my kitchen, and I braced for the confrontation, the gotcha, the questions. And instead, this journalist, this stranger, looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, and she said, "I owe you an apology. I've spent 4 months believing you were a liar, and I was right, you were lying, but I had the lie completely backwards. You weren't inflating your story, you were hiding it. You built this out of losing her, and you let the whole world call you a cold genius rather than tell them the truth." She closed her notebook. Closed it. "I'm not going to write the fraud story because there isn't one. But I have to ask you something off the record as a person and not a reporter. Why? Why let millions of people think Tether is about business when it's the most human thing I've ever encountered? Why hide the one thing that would make everyone love you even more?" And I told her the truth because I was too tired to lie anymore, and because something about a woman who'd spent 4 months trying to destroy me and then closed her notebook made me feel for the first time in years safe enough to say it. I told her that the real story was the only thing I had left of Simone that the world hadn't taken and monetized and put on a magazine cover. That if I told them the app was about my wife, then my wife would become content, a brand story, a founding myth, and they'd chew her up the way the internet chews up everything, and I couldn't bear it. That my silence wasn't about protecting my image. It was the last way I had of protecting her. Lauren was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "That's the realest reason to hide from the press I've ever heard, and I think you're wrong." And over the next hours at my kitchen table, this reporter I'd feared for months made me a case I'd never considered. That by hiding Simone, I wasn't protecting her, I was erasing her. That millions of people used a tool my wife inspired, and none of them knew her name. That there was a difference between exposing someone and honoring them, and I'd confused the two because I'd only ever seen the press do the first. And she said quietly, "I've spent my whole career exposing people who deserved it. I know exactly what it looks like when the press destroys someone. But I also know what it looks like when a story sets someone free. I could write that story, not the fraud story, the true one. And I would let you approve every word, and if it wasn't right, we'd kill it. What if the way to protect Simone isn't to hide her, but to make sure the world knows her name? But I have to tell you about what almost went wrong, because a happy ending you didn't have to risk everything for isn't worth telling. I said yes to the story. It took me weeks to say it, but I said it because Amara wanted it, because my daughter said, "I want people to know about Mom. I don't want her to be a secret. Secrets are like she's something to be ashamed of, and she wasn't." Out of the mouth of a 10-year-old, the thing I'd been too broken to see. So Lauren and I worked on it together, and I learned who she was in those weeks the way you learn about someone when you hand them the most fragile thing you own and watch how they hold it. She'd grown up the daughter of a man who lied for a living, a small-time con artist, charming and hollow, and she'd become an investigative reporter, she told me, as a kind of lifelong argument with her father, a way of spending her days doing the exact opposite of what he'd done, digging up the truth instead of burying it. Which meant she had a nose for lies that was almost supernatural, and also a wound where trust should be, because the first man she ever loved, her own father, had been a fraud, and she'd spent her whole life braced for everyone else to be one too. That was why she'd come after me so hard. A hidden origin to Lauren Mitchell wasn't just a story. It was her father's face. And in those weeks, we fell into something neither of us expected. Long nights at my kitchen table going through Simone's story, and I watched this fierce, skeptical woman handle the most sacred thing in my life with a care I didn't know reporters had. She cried once, reading Simone's old messages, and then apologized for crying, said it was unprofessional, and I told her it was the most professional thing she'd done because it meant she was actually seeing my wife and not just processing a subject. She watched me trust her with it, watched a man who'd trusted no one in 4 years hand her his whole heart in a shoebox of Simone's things. And somewhere in there, it stopped being a founder and a journalist and became two people, and both of us noticed, and both of us were terrified because there is no more compromised relationship in the world than the subject and the reporter, and we both knew it. But it was more than the ethics for her. Here was a woman who'd spent her life braced for everyone to be a fraud like her father, and she'd come to expose the biggest fraud of her career and found instead the most honest man she'd ever met, a man whose only crime was hiding how much he'd loved someone. For Lauren, falling for me wasn't just a professional problem. It was the first time in her life the truth turned out to be better than the lie she'd expected. She didn't know what to do with that, any more than I knew what to do with her. And that's exactly what almost destroyed it. Because Lauren's editor found out that his investigative reporter had gotten close to the subject of her story, personally close, and to a good editor that looks like the worst thing in journalism. A reporter compromised a story, corrupted objectivity, sold for a relationship. He gave her an ultimatum: kill the relationship or kill the story, and hand it to another reporter, one who didn't know me, one who would go back to the fraud angle, because that's what the outlet had invested 4 months in. And Lauren came to me torn in half, and she said the thing I'd been dreading, which was that maybe she had to walk away from the story, or from me, that she couldn't have both without destroying her own career and the credibility of the very story that was meant to honor Simone. And I did the thing I always did. I started to let her go. I told her the story didn't matter, that we'd keep Simone private after all, that I wouldn't let her wreck her career for me, that it was fine, all the noble self-sacrificing things that are really just fear wearing a hero costume. I was ready to lose the story and the woman, both to retreat back into my safe protective silence, because that's what I knew how to do: hide Simone and hide myself and be alone and call it protection. It was Amara who stopped me. My daughter, who had been listening from the stairs the way children always are, came down and stood in the kitchen and looked at both of us, the grieving father and the torn reporter, and she said, "Why don't you just tell everybody the truth about that too?" And we both looked at her. And she said with the devastating simplicity of a child, "The whole problem is you keep hiding true things because you're scared. Mom, now, Lauren, you think hiding is protecting, but it's just hiding. So don't hide this one either. Just tell everybody. Tell the editor. Tell the truth about everything all at once, and then there's nothing left for anybody to catch you with." Out of the mouth of a 10-year-old came the strategy that saved everything. Lauren went to her editor and she didn't hide. She told him the whole truth, that she'd been assigned a fraud, that there was no fraud, that she'd instead found the most human story of her career. And yes, that she'd fallen for the subject, and that rather than bury any of it, she wanted to disclose all of it in the piece itself. A note from the reporter explaining exactly how the story changed her, how she'd come to expose a man and stayed to tell his truth. Radical transparency. The one thing an editor can't argue with is a reporter volunteering the whole truth about herself. He didn't love it. But he couldn't call it a cover-up when she was the one insisting on exposing it. The story ran with Lauren's disclosure attached, and it was the best thing either of us ever did. The piece was called "The Tether," and it told the truth, all of it. The coder at his wife's deathbed, the promise Simone extracted the app built to steal 1 ounce of weight, the widower too wounded to tell the world her name. It named Simone. It told the world who she was: a nurse, a mother, a woman who, dying, thought of every other person who was as lost as her husband and said, "Give it to them." And the world did not chew her up the way I'd feared. The world fell in love with her. Millions of people who'd used Tether without knowing its origin suddenly understood that they'd been holding my dead wife's hand the whole time. And they wrote to me, tens of thousands of them, caregivers and widows and widowers, to say that knowing the truth made the tool sacred, that they'd thought they were using an app, and now they knew they were part of a love story. One letter I'll never forget. A man wrote to me, a widower like me, and he said he'd used Tether to care for his wife through her last year, and he'd always thought it was just a clever app. And now that he knew the truth, knew it was built by a man for a dying woman he loved, he'd gone back and reread every note he'd logged in it during his own wife's illness, and he understood for the first time that the whole time he thought he was just using software. He'd actually been part of something one grieving husband made, so another grieving husband wouldn't be as alone. "I thought I was a customer," he wrote. "It turns out I was a member of a brotherhood I didn't know existed. Thank you for telling me. It changes what that year meant." I read that letter and I wept because it was the exact thing Simone had wanted spoken back to me by a stranger years later. Give it to them so nobody has to stand in a hallway alone. She'd been right, and I'd almost let my fear keep the deepest part of her gift locked away. Simone got the thing I'd been too scared to give her. She got to be known. And knowing her, it turned out, didn't diminish her. It was the opposite. My silence had been the erasure. The truth was the monument. There's a thing that happened after the story ran that I need to tell you because it's the part that healed something in me. Simone's mother, who I'd drifted away from in my years of silence, because being near her family meant feeling the loss too sharply, called me the day the piece came out. And she was crying, and she said, "Thank you. Thank you for letting the world know my daughter. I thought you'd forgotten her, Elijah. All those interviews, all those years you never said her name, and I thought you'd buried her along with the grief and moved on to your success. I was so angry at you. And now I understand. You weren't forgetting her. You were guarding her." And she forgave me for a thing she'd been quietly holding against me for years. A thing I hadn't even known I'd done. My silence hadn't just hidden Simone from strangers. It had hidden her from the people who'd loved her too, made them think I'd let her go. The truth gave her back to all of us at once. Lauren and I were married 2 years later, and Amara, who was 12 by then, was the maid of honor and gave a speech in which she took full and accurate credit for the entire relationship, which nobody disputed because it was true. Simone's mother came to the wedding and she hugged Lauren and she told her, "You gave me back my daughter's name. You'll always be family for that." And I watched my late wife's mother welcome the woman I was marrying, the two of them, bound by a dead woman neither wanted forgotten. And I understood that the truth doesn't divide the people who loved someone, it gathers them. Lauren left investigative journalism not because of the scandal, which blew over, but because she said she was tired of spending her life exposing the worst in people and wanted to spend it telling the truth about the best. And she writes now about caregivers and the people who love the dying, and she's extraordinary at it because she learned at my kitchen table the difference between exposing someone and honoring them. Tether is still going. It's bigger than ever. And now everyone who signs up sees Simone's story on the first screen, her name, her face, the promise she made. My wife tethers strangers to their dying loved ones every single day by name. And the thing I was so afraid of, the world knowing her, turned out to be the greatest gift I could have given her memory. Amara is 15 now and says she wants to be a journalist like Lauren, the honoring kind, not the exposing kind. And Lauren tells her they're closer than people think, that both of them are just about refusing to let people be reduced to less than they are. I spent years believing that the way to protect the people I love was to hide them, that silence was safety, that a locked door keeps out the thieves. And it took a reporter sent to destroy me and a 10-year-old who kept opening doors I'd locked to teach me that hiding a true thing doesn't protect it, it just leaves it alone in the dark. My wife's last wish was give it to them. She meant the app. But she also, I think, meant herself, meant all of it, meant don't lock the best of us away where no one can find it. It took me too long to understand. But my daughter understood immediately because she is her mother's daughter and she kept answering the door. If you made it all the way here, then you already know this was never really a story about an app or a company or even a scandal. It was a story about the true things we hide because we think hiding is how we keep them safe, and about the people brave enough to open the doors we've locked. So before you go, do this one thing for me. If there is someone you've been keeping private, someone whose memory you've been protecting by hiding, consider saying their name out loud right now in the comments. Just the name. Let the world know them for 1 second in a place they'll never see. It's not exposure. It's the opposite. It's honor. And if this story reached you, subscribe and stay with me because I have more of them. True ones, hard ones, stories about the doors we lock and the people who keep knocking until we open them. The next one begins the way all the good ones do, with someone guarding a secret they think is the only thing keeping them safe. Because that, it turns out, is almost always the exact moment before someone opens the door and shows them they were never safe at all. They were just alone.